Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Amber Broughton. I'm with the DCEO Office of Accountability. And in this presentation, we will be discussing indirect cost rates. All right, so in this training, we'll provide a brief overview of indirect cost, including examples. We will discuss the purpose of electing an indirect cost rate. We will outline the different types of indirect cost rates, how to submit your indirect cost rate, and where to find additional resources. All right. To explain what an indirect cost rate is, we begin by uncovering the distinction between direct and indirect cost. So direct costs are directly related to the objective of the grant program. Direct costs are easily identifiable as being directly related to the overall goal of the project. Knowing this, we see that indirect costs are not easily identifiable as part of the final cost objective. Indirect costs are related to support activities for the grant program. They can also ease the administrative burden of reporting cost. All right, according to 2 CFR Part 200.1, indirect costs means those costs incurred for a common or joint purpose benefiting more than one cost objective and not readily assignable to the cost objective specifically benefited without effort disproportionate to the results achieved. So grantees may encounter indirect costs as the depreciation of buildings or equipment necessary for the grant program. Other indirect costs could include general administration or other expenses such as salaries for administrative staff, accounting, and personnel administration like human resources. Other indirect costs could be the cost of operating or maintaining facilities, building utilities, or office equipment not directly linked to the program objectives. So whether a cost is direct or indirect depends on factors both inside the organization, such as the timekeeping system, and specific to the grant, such as activities performed. Also want to mention that Jason will be adding links from the slides to the chat, so feel free to copy and paste those links if you would like. We also are recording this presentation, and the recording will be emailed to everyone later on today. The State of Illinois Centralized Indirect Cost Rate System is the system of record for all grantee indirect cost rate elections and approvals used for reimbursement on State of Illinois and federal pass-through awards. The State of Illinois implements the centralized indirect cost rate system maintained by GATU. And GATU is the Grant Accountability and Transparency Unit, the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, also known as GOMBI. Indirect cost rates are also referred to as ICRs. The system is required to be used by all grantees to make an indirect cost rate election or negotiate a rate with the State of Illinois pursuant to the federal uniform guidance. Indirect cost rate elections apply to all non-federal entities seeking reimbursement from funding entities. One exception for this is the U.S. Department of Education has an agreement with the State Board of Education to establish the indirect cost rate for local education agency school districts. All right, let's talk about the purpose of the indirect cost rate. The purpose of the indirect cost rate election is to determine the appropriate or fair amount of indirect funding for which each program should be reimbursed. This calculation uncovers the proper ratio between total indirect expenses and the direct cost base. The indirect cost rate system is required to be used by all grantees to make an annual indirect cost rate election or negotiate a rate with the state of Illinois pursuant to the federal uniform guidance and as adopted by the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act. Indirect cost rates allowed by the state of Illinois include the Federal Negotiated Indirect Cost Rate Agreement, or federal NICRA, the state federal rate maintained internally, or state FRMI, state negotiated indirect cost rate, or state NICRA, de minimis rate of 15%, waived rates, or special program-specific rates. Entities should review the requirements for each of the options to determine if they are eligible or if they can comply and provide the required information before they make an election. Right. So now we're going to go through each of these elections. So we've got federal negotiated rates apply to grant programs in receipt of $35 million or more in direct funding from the federal government. Although the rate is federal, it is honored by the state of Illinois. The current federal NICRA will be accepted by all state of Illinois agencies for indirect cost rate reimbursement on state awards, provided the specific award is not subject to statutory restrictions, thresholds, or ceilings that limit the indirect cost reimbursement amount. Specific indirect cost restrictions can be located within the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, for each award. Like other indirect cost rates, elections must be made in the GATA grantee portal. For federally negotiated rates, this election requires a copy of the federal NICRA as well as the most recent Cost Policy Statement, or CPS, for review and recording purposes. All right, next up we have the state federal rate maintained internally, or state FRMI. This is an option available only to local governments who have received less than $35 million in direct federal funds. Local governments are to submit a copy of their FMRI as well as the indirect cost rate proposal when electing this rate and annually for review. On to the state NICRA. This requires grantees to develop and submit their indirect cost rate proposal, or ICRP, to the state of Illinois annually for review. In addition, the state negotiated rate requires a cost policy statement, an organizational chart, the most current audit report, and a spreadsheet showing indirect cost rate calculations. So this spreadsheet, let's see, it is available on the GAT2 resource page. So we have that link in the chat for you. The state NICRA will be effective for the duration of the grantee's fiscal year. Those with state NICRAs are required to submit their indirect cost rate proposal annually. Nonprofit and for-profit entities in receipt of federal funding who are refused negotiation by their federal cognizant agency must submit correspondence or communication demonstrating this in order to qualify for this indirect cost rate election. This option requires an indirect cost rate election be made in the state of Illinois centralized indirect cost system. The proposal and supporting documentation will be developed by the grantee and submitted through the CARS system. A state of Illinois negotiated indirect cost rate agreement will be accepted by the state of Illinois agencies for indirect cost rate reimbursement on state awards, provided the specific award is not subject to statutory restrictions, thresholds, or ceilings that limit the indirect cost rate, the indirect cost reimbursement amount. Specific indirect cost restrictions can be located in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, for each award. A state of Illinois NCRA can only be used for state awards and will not be accepted by federal agencies for use on direct federal awards. All right, moving on to the de minimis rate. The 15% de minimis rate is the most frequently used rate by grantees. This rate allows 15% of modified total direct cost, or MTDC. Local governments can elect the 15% de minimis rate if their federal cognizant agency refused to negotiate a rate with them. In this case, the grantee must submit correspondence or communication that demonstrates the refusal to negotiate to qualify for this rate. Grantees may use this rate with their state of Illinois or federal NCRA while their state or federal NCRA is being negotiated. Once elected, the de minimis rate of 15% will remain in effect until such a time that the grantee or subrecipient decides to change their election. Once elected, this rate may be used for indirect cost rate reimbursement on state awards, provided the specific award is not subject to statutory restrictions, thresholds, or ceilings that might limit the indirect cost reimbursement amount. Specific indirect cost restrictions can be located in that NOFO for each award. The de minimis rate of 15% can be used indefinitely by a grantee until such a time that the grantee chooses to negotiate an indirect cost rate, which the grantee may do so at any time. Grantees may elect to waive their indirect cost rate. In these cases, grantees may voluntarily decline an indirect cost rate. This communicates that the grantee will not seek reimbursement for any state or federal pass-through awards. If this is chosen, no indirect cost can be reimbursed from state grants. Once elected, the waive will remain in effect until such a time that the grantee decides to change their election. This no rate option certifies that all state of Illinois agencies certifies to all of these agencies that the grantee will not seek indirect cost reimbursement for any state of Illinois award. Grantees that administer programs that are exempt from 2 CFR 200 subpart E cost principles may elect this option. On to program specific. There may be programs with a specific rate that a grantee may elect to use unless they have already negotiated a rate. For example, the Small Business Administration allows grantees to use the indirect cost rate of 24% for Small Business Development Center grants. So this is a rate that is exclusive for this program and cannot be used on other federally funded grants. The grantee will select their indirect cost rate election in the State of Illinois GATA Grantee Portal. Each grantee is expected to complete the indirect cost rate proposal process every fiscal year. Except for the de minimis and the waive elections, those remain in effect until the grantee changes their election type. And this is based on the grantee's fiscal year end date, not the state of Illinois fiscal year end. Organizations that have not previously established an indirect cost rate must submit an initial indirect cost proposal or rate election. It must be submitted no later than 90 days after the effective date of the state award. Organizations that have previously established an indirect cost rate or made another election are required to submit an indirect cost proposal or rate election within 6 months after the grantee's fiscal year end. The CRO Review and Monitoring Platform, or CRMP, is utilized by grantees to submit indirect cost rate proposals to the state of Illinois. When a grantee selects either a state negotiated indirect cost rate agreement election or the federal rate maintained internally within the GATA grantee portal, an invitation to the CRMP system will be sent to the grantee via email. The invitation will contain instructions on how to log in using OCTA and access the grantee's unique survey in the CRMP portal. This invitation will be sent each year with a unique survey for completion. All right, so this is a screenshot of the indirect cost rate election in the GATA grantee portal. All right, just a couple of tips with the indirect cost rate. There are grants given by state agencies that do not allow for indirect cost, which will be documented in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO. The most common ones are funds that are given for capital projects and funded with bond funds. Indirect costs are also classified as administrative type costs. Therefore, you need to be aware of any administrative cost limitations on a grant that you receive. The key to indirect cost rate is consistency. Once you select a rate in the system, you must utilize that rate for all grants unless there is a program-specific rate. A program does not allow indirect cost, or you choose to waive indirect reimbursement for a particular grant program. It is recommended that the indirect cost rate election be performed by your organization's fiscal team or by outsourcing the process to a financial organization. This helps to ensure that all costs have been considered and the correct rate is elected. As with every part of the grant process, it is extremely important to maintain thorough record keeping and accounting for everything. All right, we have a couple of resources here, and we will also put that in the chat. So we have the Centralized Indirect Cost Rate Election Manual. We have the CARS Manual. We have an FAQ page related to indirect cost rates. There is also training on indirect cost on GATU's site. So we have that link as well if you would like to learn even more about indirect cost. All right, if you are brand new to the GATA Grantee portal, I recommend checking out the GATA New User Guide. So this would be if you're brand new to the portal and you need to register on this website, which is the website for choosing your indirect cost rate. The GATA New User Guide is a PDF that contains step-by-step instructions for registering in the portal, as well as answering some common questions. So we have a link to that PDF in the chat. This guide can also be helpful not only for new users, but to current portal users as well, or maybe if you have new staff that will be working in the portal, this is a good PDF to bookmark. I also recommend checking out gata.illinois.gov, which is GATU's website, the Grant Accountability and Transparency Unit. So they are the experts on all things grants and all things GATA. They have a large amount of information, manuals, and references on several grant subjects. All right, you have many resources available to you as a grantee throughout the life of your grant. So not only as a grantee, as an applicant, we have the DCEO grantee resource site, and we have that link in the chat. On this page, which we have a screenshot here, we have all of our current DCEO grant opportunities under the Apply for Funding page. We have our video training and resource library. This contains a library of short video tutorials, reference sheets, manuals, including indirect costs, as well as many other GATA and grant-related subjects. Since you are here on this WebEx, you're likely already familiar with our upcoming grant trainings section of this website, but this is where you would sign up for our regular pre-qualification trainings. We have those monthly, and then we have these revolving topic trainings once a month as well. You can also sign up to receive information about our virtual office hours. We have that every Tuesday from 2 to 3. Myself and my colleagues in the Office of Accountability, we hop on a WebEx call like this, and it's very informal. You can ask your questions that relate to grants and NOFOs and the GATA grantee portal. So you are welcome to sign up for that if you would like to learn more about our office hours. We also have our virtual grant help desk, and that's at ceo.granthelp@illinois.gov. So we are available to answer your questions that relate to GATA and grants. If you are having issues with the portal or not sure where to find grant opportunities, we're definitely here to help. So please email us and we will do our best to answer you or point you in the right direction. And yeah, that is our DCEO grantee resource site. And that is all I have for slides for today. I'll go ahead and stop sharing. See if there are any questions. Thank you to Jason for adding links and answering questions. Okay, let's see. It looks like Megan has also answered questions as well. All right. Lenny said, can you elaborate on the last part about award and 6-month proposal for those who have chosen their choice? Can it be changed after you have been awarded? I don't believe it can be changed after you've been awarded, but if one of my colleagues has more information on that, you can also email us at ceo.granthelp@illinois.gov, and we will get an answer for that.
Amber, so
Yep.
the election can change from the de minimis rate or waive to a negotiated rate after an award has been made. However, the change of the rate can't be applied to the grant retroactively, so they can't go back and charge the higher rate to the grant for the period on which they had the de minimis or that they waived the rate. It can be charged to the grant prospectively. If the grant can be modified, the grant would have to be modified But that's if the cap, like the grant program doesn't have a cap on the rates or some other requirements. So that would be the response.
All right, great. Thank you, Megan. Okay. Abby wrote, did I hear correctly that local governments have to try to negotiate a rate with the state before they can elect the de minimis rate? Yes, I believe so, but you can email us at ceo.granthelp@illinois.gov if you have a specific question about your particular entity. All right. Is the resubmittal of an ICR letter in response to a NOFO sufficient to meet annual update requirements when the ICR is a multi-year FRMI? Megan, could you possibly answer that for Robin?
Could you repeat the question, or could you show me where is that in the?
Sure. Yeah, it's Robin Hovey. Is the resubmittal of an ICR letter in response to a NOFO sufficient to meet annual update requirements when the ICR is for a multi-year FRMI?
I don't know that answer. I assume that you would need to make an election in the system every year, though.
Okay, yeah, that would be my assumption too. Thank you, Megan. All right, Jody wrote, the Perkins grant is at 5%. Is this negotiable? I am not sure about that, but you can email us at ceo.granthelp and we can look into that. All right, Tori wrote, what would be the process if an organization wanted to negotiate their rate? Let's see, we have our manuals up towards the top. If you would like to learn more, we also have our video training library to get you started on that. You can also email us if you would, like further assistance with that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Let's see, we've got ceo.granthelp@illinois.gov. If you have any questions, we did record this presentation and it will be available on our website. It will also be sent to everyone on our training contact list later on today. And thank you everyone for coming. Have a good day.